out in the lands of danger and flame. Heroes of legend are making their name. Swords and spells with hearts full of zest. They ride with pride on a quest of interest. Heckfire Club, riding through the night. Heckfire Club, standing for what's right. Mystic lands and monsters to face. They're saving the world at a breakneck pace. From the Verdant province to Dragon's Lair, wicked wizards and trolls beware. With the rogue a knight and a mage so wise, they'll outwit danger and claim the prize. Legends told round campfire flames of secret spells and forgotten names. A hidden power, an ancient key. The fate of the realm is their destiny. Heckfire Club, riding through the night. Heckfire Club, standing for what's right. Curses, traps, and mysteries deep. No dragon's hoard is out of reach. They laugh at danger, they don't play it safe. Each wild adventure's a tale of interest. A caress. Heckfire Club, tales of interest.
The party had been battling through relentless challenges in the Darkwood, hunting an enigmatic creature which stalked teams of workers bridging the lands, rivers and woods between Tinborough and Tannertown. It was a project to build a road between two of the province's largest cities, though much debated by the Merchants' Council. The loss to Cedarcrest as the only city through which Tinborough could send their goods had been hotly contested. Indeed, the project had galvanized observable divisions between guilds and merchants from the three cities. The reward of 5,000 gold pieces to make safe again the region for the continuation of the project had been a sum simply too enticing for the party to ignore. Indeed, their journey had been thus far fraught with peril, rival adventurers, wolven beasts, and the ever-present tension of the forest's sinister magic. Each step deeper into the woods had brought them closer to their goal. Their purpose had since remained steadfast: confront the creature and claim the bounty. It was the beast in the end that had found the party. Once transformed, he had been a towering and monstrous creature of unparalleled strength and ferocity. The battle had been fierce and chaotic. Zirath, ever the stalwart paladin, had led the charge, while Thalia and Thomas would unleash torrents of arcane power, a sworn guardian of the Darkwood. The beast had nonetheless slaughtered countless people in the last months, innocent workers and tradespeople. Despite this, some in the party still had hesitated. Zirath, however, had not. The fight had raged on until, with one final earth-shattering roar, the great beast had fell, the forest silent in his wake. As the adventurers had caught their breath, battered and bloodied, the defeated creature's last words lingered, weaving cryptic threads into the tapestry of their fate. Yet, when the moonlight flared amidst the clearing, the area had burst with energy. The ground beneath them had trembled, hurling the party back, and when the magic receded, Zirath was gone, leaving his companions to grapple with the uneasy quiet that followed. The party was restless. 3 days had passed since Zirath, their steadfast dragonkin paladin, vanished without a trace. They feared the great wolf protector had had the last laugh. The oppressive gloom of the forest seemed to echo their growing despair. By the third night, it was Thalia who made the call. The Tabaxi warlock offered to return to Tinborough in search of information, her feline instinct perfect for navigating the perilous woods alone. The rest of the party lingered in their makeshift camp, each tending to their unease in their own way. Zora, the towering half-elf barbarian, paced like a restless lion. Friz scribbled furiously in her spellbook, more to distract herself than anything. And Thomas, never to keep idle hands, sharpened his daggers with a nonchalance that didn't fool anyone. On the 4th day, As dawn threatened to break through the dense canopy, a sudden crackling sound disrupted the silence. Crystals embedded in the forest floor began to hum with energy, their glow intensifying. The light bathed the clearing in ethereal radiance, and from the shadows emerged Zirath, weary but very much alive. He carried with him a gleaming artifact, the shattered remnants of a Vestran orb. Its surface shimmered with an iridescent glow, almost alive with power. Zirath's return brought relief, but the tale he carried was anything but comforting. The orb, he explained, was a legendary relic tied to the very fabric of elemental magic. According to the long-forgotten order of the Moon Singers, the material from which such orbs were made had been a gift from their mother moon. The orbs had been harvested from pieces of a fallen star gifted to the realm of mortals. Whatever they were, such orbs had been capable of channeling immense energy. Frizz's eyes sparkled with scholarly delight, already contemplating the implications. However, the party's attempts to chip away at the surrounding crystals proved fruitless. Not even Zora's brute strength could dent the impossibly hard material. The full story of where Zirath had gone needed to wait, despite the urgent information he had gathered. The party suspected the unexplored depths of the forest held more secrets still. They pressed on deeper into the reaches. Towering trees, twisted and tall, stretched endlessly toward the sky, their gnarled branches tangled like grasping fingers blocking out the light. Deeper still into the woods, a perpetual twilight lingered beneath the canopy. His tale of a celestial relic hidden deep only added another layer to the enigma of the forest. As they took stock of their battered supplies and bruised spirits, the adventurers considered their next move. They had slain the monstrous wolves and even the Alpha, a beast of unnatural size and power. But the memory of its disappearance lingered. The eerie crystals, pulsing with energy and scattering the druid's body into nothingness, left more questions than answers. Was this forest merely cursed, or was there something far more ancient and insidious at play? Their victory had come at a price: frayed nerves, dwindling resources, and the disappearance of Zirath during the battle. His reappearance, though a comfort, was a stark reminder of how unpredictable the Darkwood could be. Practical as always, the adventurers knew the Tinborough financiers would demand proof that the threat had been neutralized. The severed head of a monstrous wolf and their tales of the Alpha's defeat might suffice if the guild valued fear more than gold. Yet in their hearts none of them believed the Darkwood's secrets had been fully unravelled. Frizz, her eyes alight with curiosity, lingered over the crystalline fragments Zirath had brought back, marvelling at the material she suspected was older than recorded history. The forest had not only tested them but teased them, its mysteries beckoning like a siren's song. Something old had walked these woods since the time of legends. She would vote to venture deeper. For Thomas, the thought of turning back felt hollow. The promise of untold treasures, hidden in shrines, buried in forgotten groves, or scattered among the ruins of the Moon Singers, danced in his mind. He needed the gold to be certain. But he felt his patron tugging at him, not through words, but a feeling. He needed to find something deeper in the shadows still. He suppressed the feeling and focused on the gold. He, too, would vote to venture forth. The risk was great, but so too was the potential reward. Zora, steadfast as always, sharpened his sword with the master whetstone with a quiet resolve, his silence speaking of a readiness to face whatever lurked in the deeper reaches. He thought of his old friend Alistar. Taking a deep breath, he looked at each one of his new companions and nodded. He knew he and his friends would continue on. He too would venture forth alongside them. Zirath, his expression pensive, seemed attuned to the gravity of their decision, his divine instincts pulling him toward something yet unseen. The guardian druid's final words haunted Zirath, echoing in his mind like a curse. His gravelly voice had spoken of an empty rage, a void that consumed and corrupted. Those words struck a chord deeper than Zirath cared to admit, gnawing at the edges of his thoughts. Was his own quest for vengeance any different? The line between righteous fury and blind anger seemed thinner now. He hadn't realized how tightly he was gripping his axe. He resolved to press forward. He glanced at his companions, their resolve unspoken but clear, and knew he would follow them deeper into the Darkwood. And so the adventurers reached a quiet consensus, one born not of obligation, but of the shared fire that had carried them this far. Together, they turned their gaze toward the forest's heart, where adventure and danger awaited. Game and water had not been difficult to find in the Darkwood. They had come across a small stream hidden beneath a canopy of twisted evergreens. Zora, ever resourceful and drawing on his past as a fisherman, constructed a simple yet effective trap of woven sticks. It allowed the fish to swim in but not out, and soon a few small trout were sizzling over the campfire, their savory aroma cutting through the forest's damp chill. As the flames crackled, Zirath shared the story of his journey. His voice was low and steady, though the weight of his words carried far more than the fire's warmth could dispel. He recounted how, after his battle with the Alpha, he had been transported to a remote region near Westport. There, he had not been alone. 2 other strangers had also been caught in the mysterious shift. Together, they uncovered a growing conspiracy tied to a faction known as the Black Fang. Zirath explained that the Black Fang were quietly amassing power, their tendrils of influence weaving through the political halls of Verdun. Their origins stretched back to an ancient conflict, a draconic army that had once invaded the province. The Black Fang were descendants of that army's commanders, and now sought to reclaim what they believed to be their rightful dominion. They aimed to restore the ruling bloodlines and return Verdun to the control of old aristocratic families. Their ambitions were no secret to those who dared to oppose them, but their methods, manipulation, fear, and treachery, made them a dangerous enemy. Seeking answers, Zirath and his companions had travelled to the shrine of the Green Knight, a figure known in legend as Gawain. The Green Knight had subjected him to a test of will, a game of great stakes. Through the trial, Zirath had learned an ancient truth about his homeland. A mighty king had once ruled there, the first dragon rider, a revered ally of the dragonkin. He had maintained peace through a round table of loyal knights until betrayal shattered that unity. The king's own nephew, driven by ambition, had orchestrated a civil war, slaying the monarch and driving the kingdom into ruin. With his newfound power, the usurper had sought to expand his dominion across the seas, targeting Verdun. The Black Fang's current machinations were an echo of that ancient ambition. Their efforts were not without opposition, however. In Westport, a magistrate councillor had organised a resistance, a glimmer of hope in a province teetering on collapse. Zirath and his allies had joined forces with her, breaking into the manse of a suspected Black Fang sympathiser. There, they had uncovered a cache of ancient artefacts, relics and documents that sought to rewrite the province's history in favour of the invaders' descendants. The island loomed ahead like a phantom rising from the mists of Leviathan Bay, its cliffs jagged and weathered by centuries of relentless storms. This was no ordinary piece of land. Here, at the height of the draconic invasion, the final battle had been fought. The unified armies of halflings, gnomes, humans, elves and dwarves had stormed the last bastion of the invaders. They had broken the might of the dragonkin's conquerors, their banners burning as the remnants of the draconic forces were driven into the sea. The air still seemed to hum with the echoes of ancient war cries, as if the island itself remembered that bloody day. Thanks to the cunning and speed of a resistance-hired privateer, Zirath and his companions had reached the island under the cover of a violent squall. The winds howled, tearing at their cloaks as lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the fractured ruins scattered across the landscape. Zirath's claws dug into the slippery stone as he led Rivus and Marv deeper inland, their boots crunching over shards of crystal scattered across the ground. These crystals, like those they had encountered in the Darkwood, pulsed faintly in response to the storm, casting an eerie, shifting glow over the ruins. At the heart of the island, they found him, Barrett, the Bear, Borson. The towering warrior stood amidst the wreckage of an ancient stronghold, his armor gleaming dully under the flashes of lightning. His presence was as imposing as his namesake, and his cold, calculating gaze told Zirath all he needed to know. Borson wasn't just a remnant of the draconic army. He was a zealot, clinging to the broken dreams of conquest. He had come here searching for something, his men-at-arms fanned out in a defensive line around him. The storm roared as swords clashed. Zirath, Rivas and Marv fought with everything they had, each strike ringing out like a hammer on an anvil. The rain turned the ground into a treacherous mire, but neither side gave an inch. Marv's blade danced like a blur, carving through the ranks of Borson's guards, while Rivas unleashed a torrent of arcane energy that lit the storm-darkened ruins with bursts of violet fire. Zirath's blade met Borson's with a deafening crash, their strength evenly matched as they pushed against each other in a struggle for dominance. But it wasn't just the battle that had drawn Zirath here. Deep within the ruins, his instincts guided him to a hidden chamber, where a familiar, iridescent glow awaited. There, lying fractured on a pedestal of stone, was a shattered Vestran orb. It pulsed faintly, calling to him like a forgotten piece of his very soul. The moment his hands touched it, a surge of raw energy exploded through his body. He felt the storm, the island, the battlefield, all of it slip away as the crystals around him flared to blinding brilliance. When the light faded, he found himself once more in the depths of the Darkwood. The air was thick with silence, the remnants of the island's storm fading like a half-remembered dream. He glanced down at the fractured orb still clutched in his hands, its power humming faintly in tune with the forest's mysterious energy. Everything had come full circle, and now he stood again on the precipice of answers, or perhaps greater dangers yet to come. The forest's stillness would in the end be ominous. The ambush came suddenly like a predator striking from the shadows. Arrows whistled through the air, bolts clattered against rocks, and the ground erupted as arcane blasts of ice, fire and lightning rained down upon the adventurers. The attackers had planned this assault well. The party was surrounded, penned in by towering trees and deadly magic. Zora's instincts kicked in first. The towering half-elf roared a battle cry that echoed through the Darkwood, his voice a challenge to the mercenaries who dared attack them. He charged forward, raging, his massive sword cleaving through the air as he intercepted an arcane blast of fire with the flat of his blade, sending sparks flying in every direction. With a savage sweep, he cut down a bandit who had ventured too close. Zirath moved with the precision of a seasoned warrior. His golden eyes locked on a crossbowman perched in the trees. With a prayer to his divine patron, his blade glowed with radiant energy as he leapt high into the air, cleaving through branches to reach his target. The mercenary barely had time to scream before Zirath's sword struck true, the crossbow clattering to the forest floor. Frizz the Wiz ducked behind a fallen log as a volley of arrows thudded into the wood. Her hands moved in rapid gestures, weaving complex sigils in the air. With a muttered incantation, a brilliant wall of shimmering force erupted before her, deflecting a burst of icy magic aimed directly at her. She retaliated with a blast of fire, the spell roaring through the air and engulfing two bandits in searing flames. Thomas was a blur of motion. Darting between trees, he launched a series of eldritch blasts, each one crackling with dark energy. A bandit wizard locked eyes with him and began chanting a spell, but Thomas was faster. With a flick of his wrist, a bolt of arcane power struck the wizard's hands, disrupting the spell and causing a cascade of sparks to erupt in the air. The attackers pressed on. A bolt of lightning cracked through the clearing, illuminating the chaos for a split second. Zora caught the bolt on his sword, grounding the energy with a growl of defiance. Zirath shielded Thomas from a follow-up strike, his radiant aura flaring as he absorbed the impact. Frizz conjured a swirling sphere of wind that sent incoming arrows spinning off course. She grinned as she watched a particularly large bandit stumble backward, his aim thrown off by the gust. One bandit, seeing an opportunity, lunged at Zora's exposed back, but Zora, ever aware, spun on his heel and brought his sword down with a bone-shattering crash, felling the attacker instantly. Despite the chaos, the adventurers moved like a well-oiled machine. They fought back to back, covering each other's weaknesses and exploiting every opening. As the bandits' numbers dwindled, their resolve faltered. The ground was littered with fallen mercenaries, their weapons scattered amid the broken branches and scorched earth. One bandit, bloodied and gasping for air, clutched at his chest, his eyes wild with fear and defiance. Zora loomed over him, sword in hand. The bandit coughed, blood staining his lips, and rasped final words. The dying bandit smiled with defiance. He swore that something or someone named the Deadeye would find them. Was it an ominous threat, or the final insult of a dying enemy? Zora's eyes narrowed. He brought his sword down in a swift final strike, silencing the dying bandit's final words. Searching the bodies, the party uncovered disturbing evidence. Each bandit and thug had a matching tattoo, a red wolf. It seemed as though the Cedar Crest Timberwolves had been hired to stop all those who would help continue the road between Tinborough and Tannertown. The contract on their fallen leader suggested a wealthy and influential figure from Cedar Crest was behind this plot, someone intent on halting the road's construction at any cost. As they examined the documents, Friz frowned, her keen mind already piecing together theories. Rich patrons hiring underground gangs, guilds and merchants at each other's throats, their wealth and positions threatened by the road through the Darkwood. As they pressed on, Friz's mind was occupied with the mystery. She was piecing together events in the province, things she had seen in Tinborough before their departure. Her usually keen eye missed the gathering clouds. The sudden rise of the wind quickly turned into gale. Without warning, the sky split with a deafening crack. Bolts of magical lightning erupted from swirling clouds, striking the ground with terrifying precision. The adventurers scattered as plasma scorched the earth, sending showers of dirt and debris flying into the air. Zora leapt to dodge a rogue bolt, the impact sending a shockwave through his body. He called out to the others, his tone commanding and urgent, urging them to remain vigilant amidst the chaos. Friz, ever the quick thinker, muttered an incantation under her breath, conjuring a shimmering barrier of arcane energy just in time to block a striking bolt of light. The shards flew outward, glinting like jagged stars in the dim light. She glanced toward the sky, her thoughts racing with the realization that these storms were no natural occurrence. From behind a twisted tree trunk, Thomas assessed the situation with a keen eye. His instincts told him this assault wasn't random. Something, or someone, had sent the storm to stop them. Spotting a massive oak nearby, he darted toward it and dove beneath its sprawling branches, hoping the towering tree would draw the storm's wrath instead of him. Zirath held his ground as a bolt struck mere yards away, just missing him. The force pushed him back, but he stood firm, his gaze unwavering. His thoughts drifted toward divine intervention, sensing that the storm had a will of its own, a malevolent force watching their every move. The wind howled through the trees, bending solid oak trees and sending leaves spiraling through the air like ghostly whispers. Branches cracked and splintered, the forest groaning under the storm's assault. The adventurers moved cautiously, each step laden with the risk of unseen danger. A particularly violent blast struck a nearby tree, splitting it in two with a deafening crash. Zora reacted swiftly, throwing himself forward to push Friz out of harm's way. The impact of the falling trunk shook the earth beneath their feet, a reminder of the forest's relentless fury. Friz scrambled to her feet, gratitude etched in her expression. Zora's focus never wavered. His mind was set on survival and pressing forward through the forest's wrath. He signaled for the group to keep moving, knowing that the forest wouldn't relent until it consumed them. The weather seemed unnatural, its origin pointing toward the southeast, where spider-like clouds coiled ominously on the horizon. But whatever was causing the strange phenomena would have to wait. For now, the adventurers pressed on, each step drawing them deeper into the mysteries of the Elder Forest and the forces conspiring against them. Days passed. The party had ventured deeper into the Darkwood than anyone in living memory. The trees, once merely towering sentinels, had grown impossibly large, their gnarled trunks twisted into grotesque shapes that seemed to writhe in the dim light. Thick roots clawed their way across the forest floor, creating treacherous pathways that wound through dense undergrowth and patches of eerie, bioluminescent fungi. The bark of these eldest trees bore deep fissures, resembling jagged scars, and their sprawling branches interwove to blot out the sky entirely, shrouding the forest in a perpetual twilight. Here, the air felt heavy with an unnatural stillness, and even the wind seemed hesitant to stir. It was as if the old growth of oak and ash watched their every step, its dark heart growing darker and more oppressive with each mile travelled. Marching through the dense woods, Friz had caught a glimpse of something unusual in the distance. A structure of pale white stone, standing stark and unnatural against the dark, twisted wood, like a fragment of another world, left forgotten in the shadows. "There," she whispered, pointing toward the distant structure. The party exchanged uneasy glances, the sight of the stark white stone unsettling against the gloom of the Darkwood. After a brief discussion, they agreed to investigate, drawn by the odd contrast and the nagging feeling that this forgotten fragment of architecture was out of place. Perhaps a remnant of something lost to time, or a clue to the mysteries plaguing the cursed forest. With weapons drawn and nerves sharpened, they pressed deeper into the shadows, toward the strange white stone, their footsteps muffled by the thick, damp earth beneath them. As the twisted trees of the Darkwood gave way to a clearing bathed in silvery light, a circle of ornate stone pillars came into view, standing solemn and unbroken despite the ravages of time. The pale moonlight filtering through the dense canopy illuminated the carvings etched deep into the weathered stone. Crescent moons, woven with vines and stars, telling stories of forgotten rituals. Friz slowed her steps, her gaze locking on the intricate symbols, recognition flickering in her eyes. Tea. His was no ordinary ruin. She had seen depictions of such places in the old texts, sacred locations tied to the elusive druids known as the Moon Singers. Their teachings, centered on the balance of light and shadow, were ancient and powerful, and few living souls remembered their ways. As the party drew closer, an almost imperceptible aura of magic seemed to resonate from the stones, as though the shrine still held echoes of the songs and invocations once whispered under the moon's glow. These twin shrines stood in stark contrast to one another. The first, a radiant homage to Mother Moon, shone faintly with soft luminescence, while the second, devoted to the devouring shadow, loomed ominously, its intricate carvings and black stone exuding an aura of foreboding. As the party gathered near the shrine, Friz began explaining the significance of the carvings, her tone thoughtful and measured. She spoke of the lost order of druids who worshipped both the devouring shadow and Mother Moon, believing that balance between light and shadow was essential to the natural order. The Moon Singers, she explained, had seen the shadow not as an evil to be vanquished, but as a necessary force that gave meaning to the light. Without shadow, the moon's glow would be meaningless. Without the moon, the darkness would be absolute. Their rituals honored both aspects, embracing the duality of creation and destruction, life and death. As she traced her fingers along the crescent moon symbols etched into the stone, she described how the Moon Singers once walked this very forest, singing their secret hymns beneath the open sky, believing that only through balance could true harmony be achieved. Friz, again drawn to the intricate runes etched into the shadowed shrine, deciphered their cryptic meaning. They spoke of a sacred pilgrimage, a journey from shrine to shrine made in humility and faith, seeking the blessing of Mother Moon. The path was not one of strength, but of reverence and submission. Meanwhile, Thomas's curiosity got the better of him. His sharp eyes caught something peculiar atop the shrine of Mother Moon, a small shape untouched by dust or moonlight, as though reality itself bent around it. Intrigued, he reached toward the hidden object. In an instant, Thomas was struck by a searing blast of radiant energy, sending him stumbling back. The concealed object resisted his touch, cloaked in powerful magic. Zirath rushed to his side, his instincts flaring as another burst of light emanated from the shrine. Realizing the shrines were testing their worthiness, the adventurers pooled their knowledge and intuition. Frizz, piecing together the riddle with Zirath's help, recalled the moonsinger's reverence. Pilgrimages made on hands and knees, humbling themselves in the light of Mother Moon. With no other choice, the party followed the lost tradition. Crawling from one shrine to the other, they moved through the moonlight, their pride set aside in pursuit of the divine. The air stirred with energy, and the faint arcane aura resonated through the clearing. As they completed the pilgrimage, a brilliant beam of light descended from the sky, illuminating the shrine of Mother Moon. The hidden object revealed itself. A small white marble box, ornate and unassuming, yet brimming with divine power. Inside the box they found a trove of silver artifacts, each one gleaming as though freshly minted under moonlight. But the true treasure was the powerful artifact resting within, an intricately carved lunar amulet, humming faintly with celestial energy. It radiated protection and purity, a relic imbued with the blessings of Mother Moon herself. With their hard-earned prize in hand and a deeper respect for the mysteries of the moon singers, the adventurers pressed onward. The forest seemed to hold its breath as they departed, the shrines standing as silent witnesses to their worthiness. As the adventurers ventured deeper into the forest, its usual creaks and rustles seemed to have been swallowed by an unnatural stillness. It was Zora who first noticed it, a fleeting motion in the corner of his eye, too swift and subtle to be anything mundane. He signaled to the group, and they continued forward with hushed steps, their senses heightened. The silence shattered. The words of the dying bandit rang true, they would be the hunted. The bounty hunter known as Deadeye had found them. A barrage of arrows struck from the shadows, silent as whispers yet deadly as thunder. Zora barely had time to react, raising his sword to deflect one arrow while another whizzed past his ear. The party scattered, dodging and ducking as the unseen assailant rained projectiles from every angle. The air was thick with tension as they desperately scanned the trees, looking for any sign of their foe. The fight was a relentless game of shadows and steel, a battle that tested every ounce of the party's vigilance. The wiry half-elf ranger moved with uncanny precision, firing arrows in rapid succession, each shot landing with lethal accuracy. His movements were swift and calculated, and the moment any of the party lost sight of him, he seemed to vanish into thin air, melting seamlessly into the shadows of the menacing forest. Each time they thought they had him cornered, he would reappear from a completely different angle, loosing another volley of arrows before slipping out of sight once more. His cloak blended perfectly with the dark wood, and even the faint rustle of leaves gave no warning of his movements. The party struggled to keep track of him, each fleeting glimpse of his sharp eyes and glinting bowstring gone as quickly as it had appeared, like a ghost haunting the cursed forest. Thomas twisted behind a gnarled tree, cursing under his breath as another arrow struck mere inches from his head. His sharp eyes darted through the foliage, finally catching a glimpse, a fleeting silhouette vanishing into the dense forest. Without hesitation, he signaled the group to follow. Frizz, ever analytical, knelt by the underbrush, her fingers tracing faint signs of a trail. Broken twigs, disturbed leaves, and the faintest imprint of boots. She pointed ahead, her mind racing to keep track of their quarry's movements. Just as she stood, the glimmer of moonlight reflected off an ornate longbow. The attacker, a wiry half-elf, fired in volleys of 3 arrows, each shot vanishing into the trees without a sound. Zora charged forward, sword at the ready, his footsteps pounding against the forest floor. He batted away arrows with sheer force, his focus locked on the elusive ranger. Zirath, ever the strategist, followed closely, calling upon his divine magic to bless their weapons, the faint glow of radiant energy illuminating their path. Their foe moved with uncanny precision, his bowstring never making a sound as he fired. One moment, he was perched on a high branch. The next, he vanished into the shadows. With a swift and brutal shot, he struck Thomas's owl familiar from the sky, the bird's feathers scattering like autumn leaves. Thomas's eyes burned with fury as he watched his familiar fall. Frizz muttered a quick incantation, summoning bursts of arcane light that streaked through the forest. The glowing orbs revealed Deadeye's position for a brief moment before he slipped away once more. Realizing they couldn't fight an enemy they couldn't see, Zirath knelt and called upon his divine power, summoning his direwolf. The massive beast growled, its keen nose sniffing the air, leading the party toward his prey's scent. The wolf bounded through the trees, ignoring the arrows that peppered its thick hide. Thomas and Frizz worked in tandem, their magic lighting up the forest and forcing the hunter out of hiding. Each time he tried to blend into the shadows, another flash of light exposed him, disrupting his stealthy tactics. Despite their efforts, Deadeye's skill was undeniable. Even at close range, his arrows flew with blinding speed and unerring accuracy. One arrow grazed Zirath's shoulder, another embedded itself in Zora's armor, the impact sending him staggering back. The direwolf lunged, jaws snapping, but their enemy evaded with practiced ease. He fired another simultaneous volley of arrows, each one finding its mark. The direwolf howled in pain, but continued its relentless pursuit until finally it collapsed, riddled with bolts. The battle wore on, each adventurer pushing their limits. Frizz, her patience fraying, decided enough was enough. Gathering every ounce of her remaining strength, she unleashed her most powerful spell. Flames erupted from her fingertips, surging forward in a massive fireball that consumed the trees. The explosion shook the ground, the roar of fire drowning out all other sounds. The bounty hunter staggered, his cloak smouldering, his once graceful movements faltering. Smoke billowed around him, obscuring the battlefield in a haze of ash and embers. Zora seized the moment, charging through the smoke with his sword raised high. He swung with brutal force, cutting through Deadeye's defenses. The ranger retaliated, but his movements were sluggish, his strength waning. Despite his injuries, Deadeye fought until the very end. Arrow after arrow, he fired with precision, refusing to yield. But the adventurers pressed on, relentless in their assault. Thomas circled around, his dagger glinting in the firelight. With a swift strike, he sliced through his opponent's hand, rendering his deadly weapon useless. The half-elf's eyes widened in shock, realizing he was now outmatched. Finally, their foe fell to his knees, blood staining the forest floor. His ornate longbow lay beside him, a symbol of his defeat. With a final, defiant glare, he collapsed, the fight drained from his body. As the flames died down and the forest quieted once more, the party surveyed their hard-fought victory. The bounty hunter's beautifully crafted longbow, the silent weapon of a master assassin, lay among his belongings. Alongside it they found other useful items, provisions, arrows, and a few cryptic notes hinting at his current patron. The Darkwood was far from conquered, but the adventurers had survived another deadly encounter. The mystery of who hired the Timberwolves and deadly assassin lingered in their minds, the pieces of the puzzle still incomplete. Days again deeper they went into the Darkwood, following the faint trails on their map to the last unexplored location. The oppressive shadows of the forest clung to the adventurers, the dense canopy above blotting out the sky until, with startling abruptness, the darkness receded. The twisted trees opened to reveal an expanse bathed in gentle light, where the harsh whispers of the forest gave way to a tranquility. They approached with cautious awe, their footsteps slowing as they took in the breathtaking sight before them. The contrast to the dense, oppressive forest was striking. The open expanse felt like stepping into a dream. Gentle light filtered through the trees, casting dappled patterns on the soft grass below. The air was warm, carrying a faint scent of flowers and earth, and the quiet hum of nature surrounded them. For a moment, the harshness of the Darkwood seemed like a distant memory, replaced by this serene, timeless haven. Their curiosity grew as they noted the intricate carvings on the obelisks. The mysterious phrase repeated on each surface hinted at something extraordinary within. The adventurers, weary from their journey, felt a spark of renewed hope. The presence of the serene area and obelisks seemed like a sign, a promise that their risk in venturing through the perilous forest might finally yield a worthy reward. Beneath layers of old growth and moss, ornate mosaic stone paths revealed themselves, their intricate patterns still visible despite the passage of time. The beauty of the worn tiles hinted at a bygone era of elegance and artistry, a reminder that this hallowed place had been a sanctuary of reverence long before the adventurers' arrival. At the heart of the area stood an enclosed shrine, predating even the venerable temples of the Moonsingers. Surrounding it were towering obelisks, their surfaces adorned with intricate carvings of elven script. The same phrase was repeated on each: "Welcome, brave pilgrim, and choose wisely your prize." This hinted at the age and nature of the grove. The innumerable secrets uncovered indicated cultures and histories lost to time, guarded only by the menace of the surrounding woodland itself. Approaching with reverence, the party entered the small edifice. Inside, the air was unnaturally still, and time itself seemed to have paused. Before them sat 3 beautifully carved goldenwood chests, gleaming as though freshly made, untouched by the decay of millennia. Curiosity overcame caution. Frizz opened the first chest, revealing a radiant tiara of unrivaled craftsmanship, its delicate beauty hinting at powerful enchantments. She was mesmerized. Thomas, ever the opportunist, claimed an elven linen cloak from the second chest. The fabric shimmered, blending into the light and shadows around him. Zora, captivated by the artistry, lifted a slender, ornate goldenwood bow from the third chest, its curves perfect, its balance unparalleled. As the adventurers stepped out of the shrine, treasures in hand, the tranquil hum ceased. No birds sung, no leaves trembled. A heavy silence fell, and the temperature dropped. The stillness was deafening. Then the ground trembled. From the surrounding goldenwood trees, bark split and branches groaned as a massive figure emerged. Towering over the adventurers was a Gyaramundos tree, a colossal guardian born from magics of the forefather elven tree songs. Its form was humanoid yet intertwined with nature, its limbs composed of twisting branches and goldenwood bark, its eyes glowing with an ethereal light. The guardian's gaze swept over the party, lingering on the treasures they held. It spoke in a deep, resonant roar, a language long lost to time, but its intent was unmistakable. The adventurers had violated a sacred place, taken what was meant to be earned through understanding and respect. Balance had been broken, and the grove demanded restoration. Zora glanced at his companions, their resolve mirrored in his gaze. His thoughts betrayed his steadfast stance. They had faced countless dangers together, but this trial was different. Zora had seen guardian trees before, and he knew well their ancient power. Despite their hard-earned skills and formidable strength, the danger they now faced would be overwhelming. The adventurers prepared themselves. The grove hung in silence, its elder judgment hanging heavy in the air. They would prove their worth to claim all the prizes offered. Had they broken the covenant offered to the ancient pilgrims? These questions would have to wait. Before the first blow could be struck, a sudden rustle in the trees caught the adventurers' attention. Out of the shadows emerged Thalia, the Tabaxi warlock, her arrival swift and silent. She had tracked them from their makeshift camp in the Crystal Cove, her instincts guiding her through the Darkwood's perilous paths. Without hesitation, she joined the circle, her eyes gleaming with determination. Her presence was a welcome surprise, her arcane energy crackling as she prepared to face the Gyaramundos tree alongside her companions. With a thunderous crash, the Gyaramundos tree slammed its massive wooden fists into the earth, shaking the grove to its core. The impact sent shockwaves through the ground, and from the soil erupted towering walls of razor-sharp thorns encircling the adventurers. The walls twisted and grew with alarming speed, their barbed tendrils weaving into an impenetrable barrier that sealed the grove, trapping the party within the Guardian's domain. Thalia's presence seemed to rally the party. They braced themselves for the clash to come. The Guardian tree roared in rage. The grove had turned against them. The Gyaramundo's guardian tree loomed like an ancient titan, its bark-like flesh shifting as it reached out with massive wooden limbs. At its command, the ground trembled and burst open, 3 myconid warriors emerging from the soil, their petrified stone blades gleaming with thick poisonous spores. From the twisted trunks of the grove, 3 towering animated trees wrenched free, their roots snapping like old chains as they lurched forward to destroy the intruders. The adventurers barely had time to react before Thomas whispered his spell. A void of pure darkness erupted from the ground, slithering tendrils of hunger of Hadar, writhing hungrily around the shrine's entrance. The spell was too close. Zirath, still inside the shrine, was cut off from the others. A Myconid warrior was already in the shrine with him. Inside the darkness, Zirath fought alone, his golden eyes flaring as the fungal beast lunged with its toxic blade. He met it head-on, divine energy crackling along his sword as he parried the attack. The spores clinging to the blade sizzled against his armor, trying to seep into his skin. He would not falter. With a mighty roar, he raised his sword high and drove it through the Myconid's core, holy light radiating from the wound as the creature shuddered and collapsed into a heap of withering fungus. The shrine was his once more. Outside, the battle was pure chaos. Zora charged first, the half-elf barbarian throwing himself into a frenzy, his blade a whirlwind of steel. One of the remaining Myconid warriors barely had time to react before Zora's sword cleaved into its side, splitting thick fungal flesh. The warrior retaliated, slashing its poison-laced blade across Zora's chest, but the barbarian only roared in defiance, the pain barely registering through his rage. One of the animated trees came crashing down toward him, its enormous limb slamming against his back with bone-crushing force. He staggered but refused to fall, twisting and slashing upward. His blade bit deep into the tree's wooden flesh, but the creature barely reacted. It was more force than body, an unnatural thing given terrible purpose. Thomas and Frizz kept their distance. They saw what the guardian tree did next and knew they had made the right call. The massive creature reared back, golden sap leaking from deep cuts in its bark, and then with horrifying speed it swung a colossal arm directly at Zora. The blow landed with an ear-splitting crack, the sheer impact lifting Zora off the ground and sending him crashing into the dirt, unmoving. Blood pooled beneath him. Frizz's heart slammed in her chest. Zora had been felled in a single strike. It was too powerful. The Myconid warriors pressed the attack, one turning toward Thalia, its poisoned blade swinging for her throat. The Tabaxi warlock barely ducked in time, rolling beneath the creature's attack, her mind already reaching into the void for power. She extended a hand, and crackling eldritch blasts streaked from her fingers, striking the Myconid dead center in the chest. The creature reeled, blackened holes smoking where her magic struck, but it did not fall. Another animated tree lashed out, its limbs striking toward Frizz, who only barely dodged behind a shattered pillar. She was not built for direct combat. She knew that. She kept her distance, her hands weaving defensive spells as she circled the battlefield, searching for an opening. Thomas, seeing an opportunity, raised his hand and sent a vicious eldritch blast into one of the remaining Myconid warriors. The force of the impact sent the creature staggering, but it held its ground, its hollow fungal face turning toward him with silent predatory rage. From the edges of the battlefield, the guardian tree slammed its massive fists into the ground, and the entire grove erupted in a network of thorned vines. They shot up from the soil, curling around the adventurer's legs, digging into flesh, slicing skin. Zirath, having finally escaped the shrine, hacked through the entangling roots with divine might, glowing with the power of his oath. He staggered to Zora's side, pressing a glowing hand to the barbarian's chest, his divine magic pulling him back from the brink of death. Then, from the edge of the battlefield, Thalia screamed. 2 of the animated trees had closed in on her, their hulking limbs slamming into her with brutal force. She stumbled, her legs barely holding her weight as she coughed blood onto the dirt. The world spun, darkness creeping into the edges of her vision. The others saw, but they were too far away. No one would reach her in time. And then something answered. A dark voice whispered in her mind. "This was not her time," said her patron, the voice screaming into her mind to rise. A shudder ran through the grove as the shadows around Thalia's still form began to move. They slithered across the scorched earth, curling inward, drawn to her like ink, spilling toward parchment. Her patron's whispers wove through the air, a command, a demand, a promise. The darkness coiled up her limbs, sinking into her flesh, filling her with something beyond mortal life. Her body arched violently as the power took hold, her form momentarily consumed by writhing, unnatural blackness. When her eyes snapped open, she had become something else. She rose, her movements fluid and unnatural, shadows twisting around her like smoke caught in a storm. Her fur bristled, her eyes gleamed with abyssal fire, and her breath came out in slow, steady huffs, resolute, terrifying. Her fingers flexed, power crackling at her fingertips, an unnatural pulse hammering in her veins. The animated trees loomed, their limbs raised, but Thalia barely spared them a glance. She turned her head and spat blood at their roots. Then she leapt, a dark blur in the green grove. Their massive limbs swung down to crush her, but she was already gone, dodging between them with the preternatural speed of something neither living nor dead. Her feet barely touched the ground as she sprinted. Her gaze locked on the guardian tree, the ancient warden of the grove that had tried to take her friends from her. Thalia was a blur of motion, a streak of shadow and fury cutting across the battlefield. The guardian tree reared back, its massive limbs surging down to crush her beneath their weight. Too slow. She twisted, flipping sideways as a wooden fist slammed into the earth where she had stood a breath before, shaking the grove with its impact. She hit the ground running, never stopping, her muscles screaming in protest, her body pushed beyond its limits by her patron's force surging through her veins. Eldritch power crackled at her fingertips, coursing through her like molten fire. She raised one hand mid-sprint, unleashing a blast of pure force that ripped into the guardian tree's side. Its bark shattered, black ichor boiling up from the wound. It roared, a deep, splintering groan that shook the air, but Thalia didn't stop. She pivoted, narrowly dodging another earth-shaking strike from the tree's clawed roots, the sheer force sending debris flying in every direction. Her claws raked against the dirt, steadying her as she whirled, firing again. A second eldritch blast slammed into its twisted trunk, the impact carving deep into its form, sending pieces of goldenwood flying like splinters from a shattered door. A third blast followed, striking just above the second, the wounds growing, widening, weakening. It staggered, one of its limbs dropping to the ground as its regeneration faltered under the sustained assault. She could barely breathe. Her vision blurred at the edges, her limbs sluggish, the unnatural power keeping her standing, even as her body screamed for rest. One more. She jumped, twisting mid-air, her final eldritch blast striking the very core of the guardian tree. Bark exploded outward, the ancient beast letting out a final ear-splitting wail, its golden sap spilling like molten light onto the ground. The shadows around Thalia flickered, the last remnants of her patron's power leaving her as her body finally failed. She collapsed, her legs buckling beneath her, her body hitting the blood-soaked earth with no strength left to break the fall. The darkness receded from her eyes. The whispers in her mind faded to silence. The last thing she saw was the guardian tree reeling, the battle shifting. Zora and Zirath surrounding it, weapons unleashed. She had come back for them. She had fought for them, and for them she had fallen. Friz clenched her teeth, her eyes flashing with a desperate fury. She would burn the creature to the ground. She raised her hands, feeling the air ignite around her fingertips. She drew on all her years of hard-earned skill, every lesson, every incantation. A roaring sphere of flame erupted across the battlefield, consuming the guardian tree in a maelstrom of fire and destruction. The wooden beast screamed, its massive body catching alight, golden sap boiling as its limbs cracked and burned. Zirath knew this was his moment. He charged, his sword blazing with divine light. His wings of vengeance flared as he leaped, his blade carving downward in a final smiting strike. Zora, with the last of his mighty, swung at the creature in turn. The guardian tree let out a hollow, ear-splitting wail. Its limbs twisted, its roots curled inward, and with a final thunderous crack, it collapsed. The forest was silent once more. They heard Thomas calling them over. Thalia was not moving. They scrambled to her side, hands shaking as they pulled the last of their healing draughts from their satchels. The battle was won, but none of them could celebrate. Not like this. Desperation took hold as they forced the potion to her lips, tipping the vial, waiting for a breath, a twitch, anything. The liquid pooled at the corner of her mouth and slid down her chin, untouched. Another potion was poured, then another. Nothing. Thomas cursed under his breath, his mind racing. There had to be something else. The grove held power. They had seen it. There had to be something here to pull her back. Frizz was already tearing through the underbrush, scraping through roots and flowers, searching for any sign of life-giving magic. Zirath pushed through the scorched remnants of the battle, lifting charred golden wood bark, feeling for any divine pulse of energy. Zora, hands slick with blood, hers, his, the Guardian's, kept pressing at her wounds, kept shaking her, kept trying. Frizz was the first to falter. Her fingers stilled against the earth, the truth settling like iron in her chest. There was nothing left. No miracle, no spell, no hope. She turned, placed a hand on Zora's shoulder, and felt the moment he understood. His body tensed, then slackened, his breathing ragged, his fingers trembling where they gripped Thalia's cloak. He dropped to his knees. No one spoke. The only sound was the soft rustling of leaves, the whisper of the wind in the aftermath of their hollow victory. The grove, once so violent, was oddly peaceful now, uncaring. They worked in silence, no ceremony spoken, no prayers prayed, just hands moving with quiet purpose, collecting smooth stones, plucking flowers from the earth, arranging them with careful reverence. Thalia's body was laid to rest, her grave a mark of what they had lost, of the price they had paid for their arrogance. Zora knelt beside it, unmoving, his jaw clenched so tightly his muscles trembled. Thomas and Frizz joined him, their exhaustion settling into their bones as they gazed at the resting place of their friend. Zirath stood behind them, arms crossed, unreadable, watching as the weight of it all settled. No one could say how long they stayed there, only that the night stretched endlessly, and the dawn felt impossibly far away. The spoils of the shrine were heavy in their hands, their worth soured by what they had cost. Thomas loathed the forced greed that had brought him here. Zora and Frizz had wanted knowledge, adventure, gold. But what had it really been worth? Zirath, the pragmatist, knew this was the way of adventuring. You take what you can, you lose what you must, and you move forward. Despite his hard outlook on life, he didn't say it aloud. The walk back to Tinborough was uneventful, but that was the strange part. The Darkwood, once brimming with unseen dangers, now felt eerily still. No wolves lurked in the shadows, no bandits emerged from the underbrush, and no unseen forces moved against them. The forest had taken its toll, perhaps it had no more reason to fight them. There was no conversation, only silence. The city's towering walls came into view, its forges burning just as they had when they left, indifferent, unmoved by what had been lost. The sounds of hammers and grinding steel greeted them at the gates, a harsh contrast to the quiet of the woods. The world had not stopped for them. It never did. They made their way to the Great Forge, the seat of Tinborough's magistrates, where their contract had been issued. The grand stone hall, lined with statues of miners and smiths, felt colder than before. Inside, the magistrates sat in their high chairs, regarding them with tired, calculating eyes. Zirath stepped forward, placing a charred chunk of goldenwood bark onto the stone table before them. Proof. Frizz followed, laying out pieces of the Gyaramundo's tree, remnants of the battle they had barely survived. They told the magistrates the truth, but not the whole truth. The hunter that had been feared? An ancient druid, one who had protected the forest for generations, but was now gone. No mention of the Timberwolves. They had no idea how deep the city's corruption ran. The magistrates exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Thomas watched them closely. The story wasn't enough. They weren't convinced. There would be more questions. Doubt was creeping in. Then, something unexpected. One of the magistrates leaned forward and mentioned another adventurer, a man with a limp. He had come through just days ago, claiming that he had been rescued by them. He had spoken wild stories about the hunter, about impossible cliffs climbed and feats no man should have survived. The magistrates seemed relieved. Maybe they wanted to believe the woods were safe. Maybe it was just what they needed to hear to declare the matter settled. Thomas knew what this was. They just wanted the road built. The contract was no longer about truth, it was about moving forward. And so they were paid. 5,000 gold. Enough to live well, to move on, to celebrate. But it didn't feel like a victory. The gold weighed heavy in their hands. Thalia had come here for adventure. She had followed them into the Darkwood with fire in her heart and curiosity in her soul. And now, she was gone. Laid to rest in an elven grove beneath ancient trees, surrounded by stones and flowers placed by the hands of her friends. They had been gone 3 weeks, and Tinborough was worse than before. The city felt tense, its people whispering of trade embargoes, clashes between miners and loggers, and guildsmen who refused to cross paths on the same street. The road had been cleared, but the province was still breaking. But it all felt distant. Thomas, Friz, Zora and Zirath weren't thinking about politics. They were still standing in the Darkwood. They were still kneeling at her grave. Meanwhile, far to the south, in the sun-scorched expanse of saffron sands, the echoes of past deeds stirred once more. What had been set into motion years ago was now converging, unseen threads weaving toward the adventurer's path. Beneath the relentless desert sun, the spice crops had been wilting under frozen nights. Tendrils of clouds whipped from the bamboo hills, and the orders of the monks were restless. Celia Sundance was born into the sun-soaked spice fields of Saffron Sands, the daughter of humble field workers. Her days were filled with toil beneath the relentless southern skies. Despite their modest means, her parents dreamed of more for their daughter. They urged her to pursue a life beyond the fields, and with their push, Celia began her journey as an apprentice in the bustling healing houses of Saffron Sands. Her beginnings were far from glamorous, sweeping floors, scrubbing linens, and grinding herbs into finer powders were her daily labours. Yet Celia's sharp mind and tireless hands caught the attention of her mentors, and over time, she blossomed into a skilled herbalist with a rare gift for healing. Her hands brought relief to the suffering. Her knowledge soothed those racked with pain. She believed she had found her place in the world. But when the accursed crow's fever descended upon the province, Celia's life was irrevocably changed. The fall of Saffron Sands. The madness of the fever swept through the spice-laden streets like wildfire, turning neighbours into enemies and sparking chaos. The healing house where Celia worked became a sanctuary for the desperate and the dying, but it was not enough. The horde of men and women who had turned mad, consumed by the fever's delirium, had broken down the barricaded doors. Screams echoed in the halls, and destruction followed as Celia hid, trembling in the dark. She heard every crash of furniture, every shattering of glass, every guttural scream of agony. When silence finally fell, Celia emerged to a scene of devastation. Blood stained the floors, and the scent of crushed herbs mingled with death. She had survived, but her heart was broken by her own cowardice. In the days that followed, the streets of Saffron Sands became desolate. More of the crow's madness struck at random, leaving death and despair in its wake. The guards were overrun, the healing houses emptied, and every city in the province was then teetering on the brink of collapse. A week later, hope had arrived in the form of strangers. A wizard, a fighter, and a rogue descended from the bamboo hills, carrying whispers of arcane knowledge and strength. They had brought something with them, and the few remaining healers had been able to create a true cure for the crow's fever, one that would quell the madness without reducing the afflicted to hollowed shells. She had heard stories of the hallowed group. The 3 adventurers, the wizard named Alistar, the rogue named Lily, and the fighter named Zora had ventured into the hills to save their friend, a cleric named Dorf who had succumbed to the fever. Their unyielding resolve and quiet devotion stirred something within Celia. In them, she saw what she had until then lacked: strength not only of body but of spirit. Her own abilities to heal felt meaningless without the power to protect those in need. When the fever finally waned, Celia made a decision. Against her parents' pleas, she left the life she had built and travelled to the bamboo hills. Her heart burned with purpose, and her steps were guided by the memory of those she could not save. In the serene yet rigorous training grounds of the bamboo hills, Celia sought to forge herself anew. The monks of the Way of the Open Hand welcomed her only after she proved her determination. Her days became a crucible of discipline, pounding fists and feet against stone until they hardened like steel, enduring grueling exercises to strengthen her body, and meditating under cascading waterfalls to sharpen her mind. Master Rin, the venerable leader of the Open Hand, saw her potential and her pain. Under her guidance, Celia began to fuse her knowledge of healing with the monk's martial forms. She learned to channel her monk power not only into strikes and counters, but into restoring the injured and invigorating the weary. Her innovations were unprecedented, and her dedication was unwavering. Celia Sundance was no longer the frightened girl who had hidden in a healing house. She was a warrior of mercy, a protector who brought healing and justice in equal measure. A few years later, her fate would lead her north in search of those very adventurers. The world was changing, and the monks, though powerful, trusted few beyond their own ranks. Master Raish Al Ghul, known as the Bone Smasher, turned to Master Rin with a dire request: send a trusted disciple to find the warrior called Zora. The most experienced and gifted monks would attempt to calm the weather long enough to stave off disaster. The cities were often distrustful of the freeholds, and the monks were no different. Master Rin called upon Celia, who knew the ways of outlanders. She had proven her resolve, her strength, and her compassion. This task would test her in ways she had yet to imagine, but she was ready. Carrying the blessings of her teacher and the weight of her calling, Celia Sundance set out once more. The world was unbalanced, the weather growing more severe with each passing day, but Celia's heart was as steadfast. She would find the one they called Zora, her first true task as a warrior of mercy under Master Rin. For Celia Sundance, the time to heal, to fight, and to protect had come. Her arrival in Tinborough had been a journey built on equal parts determination and doubt. The Shadow Monk's network of whisperers had carried tales of great exploits in the Darkwood, leading her north to the mining city in search of the warrior called Zora. Her mission was clear: deliver Master Raish's message. But nothing had prepared her for what she found. The Drunken Miner Inn was far from a hall of heroes. Thomas sat at a corner table, his sharp grin contrasting the increasing desperation of the locals as he played yet another rigged hand of cards. Friz perched atop a bar stool, swirling a delicate glass of wine as she furiously scribbled into a journal that seemed to expand with each passing day. Zirath stood near the hearth, his dragonborn frame casting a shadow over the room, his stoic silence more foreboding than the storm outside. And then there was Zora, the barbarian, the warrior who had fought beasts of legend and felled ancient terrors, lay face down on the counter, snoring faintly between bouts of drunken muttering. The wooden bar beneath him bore deep dents, marks of either an outburst or a particularly aggressive drinking contest. Celia stopped in the doorway, blinking at the dishevelled disaster before her. The barkeep, without looking up, answered her unspoken question. They had been there for 2 weeks. Apparently, this was their new normal. Striding across the floor, she closed the distance between her and the collapsed barbarian, her steps firm with frustration. Friz glanced up, offering a sheepish shrug, before muttering something about how Zora had been processing. Celia barely acknowledged it before grabbing the barbarian by the collar of his tunic and hauling him upright with more strength than her frame suggested. His head lolled to the side, eyes barely open, his lips parting as if to form words. Instead, he snored. The patience she had left snapped. This was her first true mission as a monk, and Celia Sundance would not be undone by an ale-soaked adventurer deep in his cups. She shook him violently. Still nothing. No reaction. Her gaze flicked to Frizz. She demanded ice water. A lot of it. Frizz, intrigued but unbothered by the lack of context, complied with unnerving efficiency. From her hands, cold air warped and chilled pails prepared by Celia. In moments, she was armed with 4 buckets of freezing cold water. The first barely made him stir. The second earned a groggy, incoherent grumble. The third prompted a string of curses, but still, he did not rise. The fourth, it was war. A perfectly aimed cascade of ice water slammed into him with the force of divine reckoning, sending him lurching upright, sputtering and gasping, water streaming from his beard like a drowned bear dragged from a river. His wild eyes locked onto Celia, confusion and outrage battling for dominance. The entire tavern erupted with laughter. Even Thomas, previously occupied with fleecing the locals, nearly lost his grip on his stack of winnings. Frizz stifled a giggle behind her wineglass, while Zirath, ever brooding, exhaled a quiet huff of amusement. Zora, however, blinked slowly, struggling to process the situation through the lingering haze of ale and grief. Celia's arms crossed, her posture unwavering. She asked again, was he Zora? Still dripping and shivering, he managed a weak nod, a hiccup escaping as he steadied himself. He wanted to know why she cared. Celia studied him for a moment, disappointed but not surprised. She had expected more. The response, when it came, was dry and cutting. She had thought he'd be taller. The laughter doubled, rippling through the drunken crowd, but Zora's addled brain struggled between taking offence and simply accepting the insult as fact. The moment was short-lived. Celia introduced herself, her name sharp and decisive, and the reason for her journey became clear. She had come on behalf of Master Raish Al Ghul, seeking the warrior he once was. But now, seeing him like this, she was no longer sure why. Zora muttered something about needing another drink, reaching for a nearby tankard. Celia slapped it away before he could take it. He was not getting another drop until they talked. The next hour was tense, sobering, and filled with urgency. Celia spoke, detailing the province's worsening state, the fracturing elements, the growing instability. Master Raish's plea was clear. Aid was needed. The world was spiraling toward chaos, and it needed warriors willing to fight for it. The words settled over them like a heavy cloak. The weight of Thalia's death, the hollow victory in the Darkwood, the aimlessness that had consumed them since returning to Tinborough, it all pressed down in silent acknowledgement. Thomas abandoned his card game, listening in quiet contemplation. Frizz had stopped writing, her quill still against the parchment. Zirath's arms remained crossed, but for the first time, his gaze softened. Finally, Zora shifted. He still looked worn, frayed at the edges, but there was something steadier in him now. He agreed to listen. It was time to hear what Raish wanted. Maybe it was time they stopped sulking. Celia's features relaxed just slightly. Maybe it was. Frizz brightened at the thought of meeting the monks. Their kind rarely ventured beyond their sanctuaries, their traditions and wisdom kept within the secluded halls of their temples. The shadow monks were another matter entirely, whispered about in passing, rumoured to keep watch over the province's hidden currents. You never saw them, and that was the point. The idea of speaking with such elusive figures sent a thrill through her mind. With practiced ease, she turned the page of her journal and began a fresh chapter, a journey to the bamboo hills. The ink flowed swiftly, her quill scratching against parchment as she outlined her thoughts, questions and theories. It felt good to focus on something tangible, to let her mind dwell on knowledge instead of loss. They had themselves endured the unnatural wrath of the skies, battered by gale-force winds that howled with unnatural fury, and lightning strikes so sudden, so precise, that no mere storm could explain them. The very elements had turned against them, lashing out with unpredictable violence, far beyond the realm of seasonal tempests. Each encounter with the feral, chaotic weather left them with the same unsettling thought. This was no accident. Now they learned the chaos stretched far beyond them. In the southern reaches of Verdun, the same unnatural forces that had battered them in the wilds were now withering crops, choking rivers with sudden droughts and drowning villages in unseasonable floods. Farmers who once tilled fertile land now struggled to salvage what little remained. The group, still scarred from loss but now stirred by purpose, prepared to set out once more. Celia had arrived seeking warriors, but what she had found was a family bound in grief, and a team still worth believing in. Across the tavern, Zirath murmured something low to Thomas, just out of earshot of the others. A question about how much the job might pay. Thomas, without looking up, collected his winnings from the table and shrugged. He shared the same thought with Zirath. It was probably not enough. We end our tale today with the party, now in the company of Celia Sundance, seeking new adventures and the origins of the strange weather from the bamboo hills. Until next time, adventurers.